I did not say a word. I did not put down my coffee cup. I just sat there at my daughter's kitchen table, watching my son-in-law cut her toast into triangles and slide the plate toward her like she was a child who couldn't be trusted with a knife. And I thought, he has no idea what I spent 31 years doing for a living. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this really started. My daughter, I'll call her my girl, because that's how I've always thought of her, even now that she's 36. Met him at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital where she worked as a pediatric occupational therapist. He was charming. That's the word everyone used afterward when things had fallen apart and people were trying to make sense of it. Charming. He raised money for good causes. He wore nice shoes. He remembered your name the second time he met you and asked about the thing you'd mentioned the first time, the way some people are trained to do. He worked in commercial real estate development, which in Calgary means he drove a truck that cost more than my first house and talked about square footage at dinner parties. My daughter called me from the parking lot after their third date. It was February, which in Alberta means the parking lot was -22, and she was sitting in her car with the engine running because she was too happy to go inside yet. I remember that detail because I was standing at my kitchen window in Winnipeg, watching snow come sideways off the prairie and thinking how glad I was. She'd moved somewhere with mountains, somewhere that felt less flat. "Mom," she said. "Mom, I think this might actually be something." I told her I was glad. I meant it. She'd had a hard few years, a long relationship that ended badly, a move to a new city, building her career almost from scratch. She deserved something good. She deserved someone who looked at her the way her father used to look at me before he passed, like she was the most interesting person in any room she walked into. I want to say I had a feeling right away. I want to tell this story that way because it's tidier, but the truth is, I didn't. Not for a while. The first time I visited them in Calgary, they'd been together about 8 months and had just moved into a townhouse in Beltline. I thought he was fine. Attentive, even. He picked me up from the airport. He'd remembered I don't drink red wine and bought a bottle of Riesling. He took my bag from the trunk without being asked. My daughter seemed happy. She seemed like herself. She was laughing at the dinner table and finishing her own sentences and telling a story about a patient that had us both in tears, the good kind, and he was watching her with what looked like pride. I flew home thinking, okay, this one might be real. The second visit was 14 months later. They were engaged by then. The ring was beautiful, white gold, which she'd always preferred over yellow, which meant he'd paid attention or she'd told him outright, and I wasn't sure which. I told myself it didn't matter, but something felt different that second trip. Small things. Things I noticed the way you notice a smell that isn't quite right in a house. Not strong enough to name, just enough to make you stop and look around. My daughter asked him at lunch if she could order the salmon. Not in a playful way. Not in a, what do you think should I get the salmon way between two people who are in the habit of asking each other opinions. In a way that waited. In a way that had a breath held inside it. He glanced at the menu. "It's a bit pricey," he said. She ordered the soup. I watched that. I filed it away without knowing I was filing it. His mother joined us for dinner the second night. She arrived 40 minutes late, did not apologize, and spent the meal making observations about my daughter's apartment. The kitchen was small. The windows didn't get afternoon light. The neighborhood was transitioning, which she said with a tone that could have meant anything. My daughter smiled through all of it. She refilled the water glasses. She complimented the woman's earrings. On the drive back to the airport, my daughter said, "She just takes some getting used to." I said, "Most people do." Neither of us said anything else about it. The wedding was in September, out in the Kananaskis, which was stunning in the way only the Eastern Rockies can be stunning. The kind of beautiful that feels almost rude, like the landscape is showing off. My daughter wore her grandmother's pearl earrings and cried during the vows and danced with her cousins until her feet hurt. I took about 400 photographs on my phone and ate too much of the buttered chicken because the caterer was extraordinary. By any measure, it was a beautiful day. I drove back to Winnipeg the following week telling myself that the things I'd noticed were small, that every marriage has its private language, its negotiated silences, that I was a 63-year-old woman who had spent 3 decades as a family court mediator and perhaps saw conflict in places where other people saw nothing at all. That was possible. That was a real possibility I held on to for longer than I should have. The birthday dinner happened 18 months after the wedding. My daughter turned 35 in April. She'd planned a dinner just immediate family, a cousin she was close to, 2 friends from work, a restaurant in Inglewood she loved, the kind of place with exposed brick and a wine list on a chalkboard and servers who know the menu by heart. She'd been looking forward to it for weeks. She'd sent me a photo of the dress she bought, navy blue, slightly off the shoulder, the kind of thing she'd have worn without a second thought 10 years ago. I flew in 2 days before. We had coffee the morning I arrived, and she seemed tired in a way I couldn't quite place, but happy to see me, and we talked about her work and my work and a book we'd both been reading, and it felt normal. It felt like us. The night of the dinner, I was already at the restaurant when they arrived. My daughter walked in wearing the navy dress, and she looked beautiful. Truly beautiful, but she was walking a half step behind him, which was a small thing, and she was scanning the room the way people do when they're not sure what they'll find there. We were seated. Menus came. The cousin ordered wine. One of the friends from work, a warm, loud woman who I liked immediately, was telling a story about a patient who had brought her a jar of homemade jam and a handwritten note. My daughter was laughing. Her shoulders came down. She reached for the bread. The server came to take orders. My daughter opened her mouth and said, "I think I'll have the," and my son-in-law said, without looking up from his menu, "She'll have the chicken. She always overthinks it." There was a pause, the kind of pause that has a shape. My daughter closed her menu. "Sure," she said. "The chicken?" The server looked at her for just a moment, just a professional fraction of a second, checking. Then she wrote it down and moved on. I did not say anything. I picked up my water glass. I looked at the candle on the table. I thought about the 31 years I'd spent in a room with 2 people and the space between them, reading what wasn't being said, and I thought, there it is. There is what I've been smelling in this house for 2 years. His mother made a comment about the restaurant being a bit precious. The cousin laughed at something that wasn't funny. The friends from work carried the conversation with the kind of social grace that comes from years of managing frightened children and their anxious parents. My daughter ate the chicken. It was probably fine. I don't think she tasted it. When they brought out the small cake the restaurant had prepared, the server had clearly been tipped off. It was a birthday. My son-in-law leaned back in his chair and said to the table, to no one specifically, "She made them do this. You know how she is about her birthday." The cousin said, "Who doesn't love a birthday cake?" My daughter smiled. The smile didn't reach anything. I watched her blow out the candle, and I thought about the girl who at 7 years old had climbed to the top of the tree in our backyard because her older brother said she couldn't, who had stood on that branch and looked down at us with her arms out like she was balancing on a beam, who had never, in all the years I'd known her, needed someone else's permission to feel good about something. I excused myself to use the restroom. I stood at the sink for a moment, ran cold water over my wrists, which is something I do when I need to think clearly, a habit from long days in the mediation room. Then I took out my phone and I called my colleague. We'd worked together for 20 years. She'd moved to private family law practice about a decade earlier, one of the best in Winnipeg, but she had referrals across the province. "I need you to recommend someone in Calgary," I said. "Someone good. Someone who handles coercive control cases." She didn't ask me to explain. She'd known me long enough. She gave me 2 names. I went back to the table. I ate a piece of the cake. I told my daughter her dress was beautiful, and I meant it. That night, after my son-in-law had gone to bed, my daughter and I sat in her kitchen. She made us chamomile tea. She was quiet for a while. Outside, April in Calgary was doing what April in Calgary does. A thin skin of ice still on the puddles, the mountains holding the last of the winter light long after the city had gone dark. He didn't mean anything by it, she said. About the chicken. She hadn't said what she meant, but we both knew. I didn't argue with her. I'd spent a career not arguing with people in that particular moment. Instead, I asked her how she was sleeping. She said, fine. I asked her how work was going. She said she'd cut back her hours because it was easier for scheduling. She didn't say easier for whom. I asked her if she had access to her own bank account. She looked at her tea. We consolidated everything when we got married. It's just practical. Of course, I said. He handles the finances because he's better at it. Of course, I said again. Then I said, do you remember when you were 7 and you climbed that tree and you stood up there with your arms out? She looked at me. Her eyes filled very quickly the way eyes do when something unexpected reaches them. Yeah, she said. You stayed up there for 20 minutes. Your brother was so annoyed. She laughed, a small wet laugh. He said I was showing off. You were, I said. You absolutely were. And it was wonderful. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, I'm tired, Mom. I told her I knew. I told her I loved her. I told her there was no rush for anything. But I want to be clear, I had already made the call. Both names my colleague gave me were excellent. I chose the one whose specialty was exit planning for financially entangled situations, because 31 years in family court teaches you that the money is almost always the lock on the door. Over the next several months, I visited 3 more times. Each visit, I paid attention. I built a picture, not for any legal purpose, not to be used anywhere, just so that when my daughter was ready, she would have someone standing next to her who knew the full shape of what she'd been living in. The hours she'd cut at work turned out to be something he'd requested. He called it supporting them as a unit. I called it income isolation, privately, to myself, in the language of my profession. She asked him before she bought things. Not big things. Shampoo. A birthday card for her cousin. He criticized her in company in a particular way, a way designed to look like teasing, the kind you can't object to without seeming humorless. Her cooking, her memory, her tendency to catastrophize, which was what he called it when she expressed any concern about anything. His mother visited often and stayed long, and my daughter rearranged her entire life around those visits. Canceling plans with friends, cooking elaborate meals, keeping the apartment in a state of readiness that left her exhausted. Once, in the fall, I arrived to find her covering something on her forearm with a cardigan. October in Calgary is cold enough that a cardigan is reasonable. I didn't say anything. I watched her hands. I noticed she kept the sleeve pulled down even indoors. I didn't sleep that night. The following morning, while he was at the gym, I sat down with my daughter at the kitchen table and I put my hand over hers and I said, I need you to know that I see you. I need you to know that whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone, and you don't have to decide anything today. She pulled her sleeve up. The bruise was faded, yellowish green. She said he hadn't meant to. She said she bumped into a door frame. She said it was nothing. I nodded. I didn't push. But I said, when you're ready, whenever that is, tomorrow or 2 years from now, I have a name. I have someone who can help you understand your options. You don't have to do anything with that information. I just want you to have it. She didn't answer me. She made us both eggs, and we ate at the kitchen table and talked about a television show we were both watching, and I flew home 2 days later and cried the entire flight. What I want you to understand is that nothing I did next was dramatic. There was no confrontation. There was no speech. There was no moment where I stood up at a dinner table and revealed something. People seem to want that part of the story, and I understand why. It's satisfying. It has a shape. It feels like justice has a face. But real protection is quieter than that. I'd spent my career helping people find exits from situations they couldn't see the edges of. I knew the resources. I knew which organizations in Calgary worked with women in financially controlled relationships. The Calgary Women's Emergency Shelter, the Brenda Strafford Center, legal advocates who could walk someone through their options without committing them to anything. I knew the family lawyers my colleague had recommended. I knew that Section 8 of the Divorce Act had been amended and that coercive control was increasingly recognized in Canadian family court proceedings in ways that gave a leaving spouse real legal footing. I gathered that information carefully. I wrote it all out, in plain language, in a letter, addressed to my daughter, and I mailed it to her office at the hospital because she had told me once, without context, that she sometimes felt like her mail at home was looked at. I sent it to the hospital. I addressed it to her professional name. The letter said, "I love you. Here's information. Here are names. Here are phone numbers. You owe me nothing. You don't have to call any of them. But I want you to know that leaving is possible and that people do it, and that there is a life on the other side that looks like you." 6 weeks later, she called me. I called the number, she said. The lawyer. I sat down on my kitchen floor, which is not something I normally do. "Okay," I said. She was really kind. She is, Mom. Her voice broke, just slightly. "I don't know how to do this." "I know," I said. "That's what she's for. That's what all of them are for. You don't have to know how. You just have to make one phone call, and then you made it, and now the next one is a little easier." It took 8 more months. There were steps backward and steps forward and a period in February where I genuinely didn't know which way things would go. But I had learned, in my career, that the timeline belongs to the person leaving. You don't hurry it, you hold the door, and you wait. She left him in the spring. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Kensington that got good morning light, which I noticed on my first visit and didn't say anything about but thought about for days. She went back to full hours at the hospital. She started seeing a therapist, a good one, a woman she described as aggressively practical, which made me laugh until I cried. The divorce was not easy. He contested things. His lawyer pushed. Hers pushed back harder. And the documentation we'd quietly built, the financial records, the evidence of the controlled access, the medical note, held up in a way that mattered. She got her settlement. She got her pension contribution back. She got her name on her own bank account for the first time in 4 years. The day she texted me a photo of the new account statement, just her name, just hers, at the top, I put my phone down on my kitchen counter and stood at the window for a long time. The snow was doing what Manitoba snow does in April, which is to say, it couldn't quite decide whether to stop, and the light was that particular late afternoon gray that always made me a little melancholy when I was younger, but which I've come to love. It means the season is turning. It means something harder is nearly over. My son-in-law did not know, when he ordered chicken for a grown woman at her own birthday dinner, who he was sitting across the table from, he did not know that I had spent 3 decades in rooms where people were hurting each other slowly and quietly, and that I had learned over all of that time not to make noise about what I knew. He thought I was just a mother. He thought I was just a woman of a certain age, eating my meal, staying out of it. That's fine. He was wrong on every count, but that part is fine. What I want to leave you with is not the ending where he lost, though he did. What I want to leave you with is this. My daughter is in her kitchen in Calgary right now, with the windows that get the morning light, and she is ordering exactly what she wants for dinner. And nobody at that table has an opinion about it. If you were watching this and something in it landed somewhere specific, if some part of what I described felt familiar, like furniture you recognize from a room you've been in, please know that there are people who will hold the door for you. You don't have to know what comes next. You just have to make one call. The number for the Assaulted Women's Helpline is available across Canada, 24 hours a day. If you are in Alberta, the Calgary Legal Guidance Office offers free consultations. If you can't call, you can text. And if you have someone in your life who is living inside something you can only see from the outside, be patient with them. Be steady. Hold the information. Don't push. The timeline is theirs. That's the whole of what I know. I think about that April night in Calgary more than I expected to. Not the dinner itself, not the chicken my daughter didn't choose, or the smile that didn't reach her eyes when they brought the cake, but the drive to the airport 2 days later, when she hugged me goodbye and said, "Thanks for coming, Mom," in a voice that was working hard to sound light. I held on to her a second longer than usual. I didn't say anything about what I'd seen. I just held on. What I've learned after 31 years of sitting in rooms with people who are hurting each other slowly is that the damage in these situations is never just physical. It's the quieter erosion that does the most lasting harm. The way a person stops trusting their own hunger, stops finishing their own sentences, stops standing on branches with their arms out. My daughter didn't lose her confidence all at once. It left her in small increments, over months, the way daylight leaves in autumn. You don't notice it going. You just notice one day that the room is darker than it used to be. I've thought a lot about what made it possible for her to eventually find her way out, and I don't think it was anything I did strategically, though I tried to be strategic. I think it was something simpler. She knew, somewhere underneath all of it, that she was still the person she'd been before, that her own judgment was still intact, that she was capable of more than she was being allowed to show. That knowledge didn't disappear. It just went quiet for a while, and when she was ready, it was still there waiting for her. There's something I want to say about that, because I think it matters. The people who find their way through situations like my daughter's are not extraordinary people. They are not people who had more willpower or more resources or more luck, necessarily. They are people who held on to a small, stubborn sense of their own worth long enough for an opening to appear. That's what I mean when I say she had courage. Not the loud kind, not the kind that makes a scene at a birthday dinner, but the quiet kind that makes one phone call to one lawyer on a Tuesday afternoon when part of you is still terrified. And the thing that helped her recognize that opening, I think, was that she'd been given something early, a sense of her own intelligence, her own capacity to reason through hard things, her own ability to look at a situation clearly even when it was painful to look at. I tried to give her that when she was small. It's the most useful thing a parent can pass on. Not certainty, not safety, but the confidence to think for herself, even when someone nearby is working hard to convince her she can't. What I hope, if you've listened this far, is that you hold on to those things in yourself, your own sense of what's right, your own ability to read a room, to trust a feeling, to say, something here is not what it should be. That clarity is not naive. That clarity is how you find the door. My daughter is in her apartment in Kensington right now. The windows get the morning light. She orders exactly what she wants. That's the whole of it.